Welcome to Third Fridays, the monthly legal talk show from Lois LLC featuring attorney Christian Seeson. This is the original forum in which real attorneys discuss workers' compensation issues, share their opinions, and engage in colorful conversations. This show showcases diverse perspectives of attorneys handling workers' comp cases, including case law trends, practical litigation strategies, and hot topics. Here's your host, Christian Seeson.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to, it's October. The October 2024 edition of the Third Fridays podcast. Only 3 more of these to close out the year of 2024. It's amazing how quickly this year has gone. We went from last month, the one and only Greg Lois on the show to talk about, where we've been, where we're going, as we celebrated our 9-year anniversary. And I thought it would be a good follow-up to talk about, really the industry and a lot of the news that's really permeating. You'll see it if you are a member of this industry. If you're listening to this podcast and you are not my mother, my fiance, or anybody in my fiance's family, then you're probably seeing a lot of these, articles on your LinkedIn. You're talking about it. So we might as well give you our take on it and how it's affecting our day-to-day, because that's what this podcast is, right? I don't, know how often we think about where we started, but this podcast was born out of the idea that as attorneys and paralegals, we talk shop all day, sometimes every day, sometimes on the weekends, right? Because, we live and breathe this stuff as a part of our life. And what would it be to be a fly on the wall for some of our clients, some of the people that follow us, some of our family, some of our friends, to see what we talk about every day. So I'd like to welcome someone who has had a lot of experience dealing with the types of these claims that are in the news. It's our senior associate, Meisha Powell. Welcome back to the show.
Hello, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
So this really was, not something that just happened more recently, right? Like and I guess really we should tell everybody, right? There is a lot of news about fake claims, fraudulent claims. You have litigation funding firms, you have runners as referral sources, you have unethical doctors performing surgeries that are billing for surgeries they didn't actually do. A lot of finger pointing now in the industry. And, when we look at it almost through the lens of workers' compensation attorneys, sometimes we're applying that to our cases, right? We have this healthy skepticism sometimes of some of these claims that claimants bring forward. Now, one of the many reasons why you're a perfect person to talk about this, Meisha, is, for one, you started your, path in workers' compensation as a claimant's attorney. Now, I don't think it was as prevalent back then, right? But can you tell us a little bit about your experience as a claimant's attorney, and maybe, did you have those experiences? Did you think that perhaps a claimant was fabricating something? What was your experience like?
Right. Well, thank you. Actually, it's interesting that you bring that up. So yes, I did start my career in workers' comp as a claimant's attorney, and I can honestly say what I'm seeing now is nothing like what I saw when I first came into the industry. While working with claimants, again, I was representing them, trying to really navigate them through the workers' comp system in New York, which is extremely complex. I never came across a claimant that I thought faked an accident, and now here we are defending the claimant that has faked the accident. I have to say, even when I switched over and I started representing carriers, initially, I did not see as many claims of these fake or fabricated claims until most recently.
Right.
I would say within the last year or two, you can honestly see the uptick. Just from, as soon as the claim comes through the door, just by the facts that are presented, it looks sketchy, to say the least. Yeah.
I would think, going back, you're saying it last year or two, put us 5 years ago, I think maybe we were not trusting of claimants in terms of embellishment of real injuries, right? Like maybe they had a real accident and they had a real injury, but you're not that injured, right? Or your scheduled loss of use isn't that high, or you have the ability to do a little bit more work. I think it was not so much this overarching, no, you made this entire thing up where none of it is true, right?
Correct. Yes, absolutely. And when I worked as claimant's attorney, I did a lot of representing of like MTA and like different type of workers. Now, on the carrier side, my entire world is construction claims.
Right.
So you can imagine the difference in what I'm seeing. I'm dealing mostly about 90% of my cases are construction claims. So yes, it's very different than where the other side of the world that I came from.
Yeah. And so I think then, fast forward, we've been dealing with, I say dealing, but we've been hearing about all of these things in the news, right? Like, the mafia's involved, or, these bad doctors, claimants, firms withdrawing from their personal injury lawsuits because they're uncomfortable with the referral sources. All of these things that we've been doing, right? Like, come to a head with the tradesman case where, we're all now in this fight together to stop insurance fraud, to stop this idea that, there's no integrity with employment anymore. And we're really defending that integrity. You came across this article that you shared with the entire firm last week. Can you tell our listeners, they may already know about it, but tell them at least like a gist of what this article was saying.
Right. So this was shared with me, and I remember when I opened it and the first thing I saw was, these fake construction claims and the addresses where the claimants stem from are very similar. So, excuse me. One of the addresses was an address in the Bronx, Ellis Avenue, and the article said that there were 21 claimants that stem from that address.
They all live together, allegedly, right?
Correct.
They
on the C3,
yeah,
that's the address that they're using, right? So I'm reading the article and I'm like, wait a minute, this address kind of sounds familiar. Right? So I'm continuing to read, and there's a few other addresses that they found similarities, 18 claimants, 7 claimants from the same address. And that in itself seems very suspicious. But in my own experience, a couple years ago, I actually got 2 cases from our client, and this is the address that is mentioned in this news article. So the first thing I did was I was like, wait a minute, I think I represented one of those claimants that they're referring to.
Or one of those carriers.
Yes, I represented the carriers referred to in the article. And it does seem like there is a concerted effort, right? Where these individuals, I don't know, maybe they're talking to each other. And that's really what happens, right? So they file the claim, it gets through, whatever.
It only takes one.
Correct.
Right?
It takes one to get through, and that probably creates 100.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're seeing now. But to have the same exact address to me was remarkable. I was like, wow, and think about it. Hundreds of thousands of cases are filed in New York, all the time. So the news article had to do some extensive research to actually match.
Incredible amount of journalism.
Correct.
In this article.
Correct. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
This reporter, and I'm sure this reporter is not working alone. So, I'm sure there's like a team of people that are working to create this article, these findings where, 30 construction injury claims are tied to people living at a specific apartment building on Ellis Avenue.
Correct.
In the Bronx. And so, maybe on the surface, that's not that crazy. But if you really think about how the industry is shaping in terms of what's going on, right, it actually makes more sense that, why would you have a workers' compensation accident with the person the same accident that the person had next door? Right? Why are they construction accidents? Why are they not like, I was a bank teller and I have carpal tunnel syndrome? No, it's like these garden variety construction claims. You say you deal with them, 90% of your docket is with these claims. And so having this, it's almost like, it kind of smells funny. So something funny is going on there, right? Like it doesn't pass the smell test. And so when we're dealing with the claims, you realize, wait, this brings up actual cases that I'm dealing with. So you had 3 separate claims that are very inextricably linked.
Correct.
Based on this Ellis Avenue address. Can you talk about, I guess without naming, who the parties are, what happened in some of these cases that kind of shine a light on the fact that this really is a pervasive issue in our industry?
Right. So when the cases first came to me, you're looking at the whole case and you're trying to figure out, okay, what happened here? But definitely the address jumped out, right? You're like, wait a minute, it's the same address. It's almost like I thought it was a duplicate claim.
Oh, right. Like maybe there's these are just 2 of the same. We'll just move them to one.
Correct.
Wow.
I thought it was a duplicate case. I thought perhaps they needed to be killed and combined. But then the names were very different. The date of birth was different. However, it was 2 young ladies, and it was everything about what was reported was almost exactly the same. I think they just reported on different floors that had happened. Now, one of the things when you get a case like this, when you're like, no, something is definitely wrong here, the pressure is now on.
Oh, yeah.
Because I got to prove this to the judge, and me walking in there and saying, but judge, they live at the same address. It's just not going to be enough.
I don't think that's listed as a legal defense.
Right.
They live at the same address.
Right, exactly. So we had to find a way to kind of lay out the facts, lay out, all the different holes. And then, unbelievably, we were able to tie 2 of the claimants to a third claimant. And in 2 of the cases, we were able to get the judge to actually travel the files because, eventually we raised fraud based on the information that was being provided. We were getting information from our client. We raised fraud. And, a long story short, these cases, all 3 cases were actually disallowed in the end. So
that's at the end. No,
yeah.
we're not going to make it too short, right? So
right.
It's a really, really incredible story where, you're trying to link 2 cases together and then this third case together where it's not so obvious. It's not like, it doesn't pass the smell test, but in order to, like you said, to make your legal argument stick, you have to have like proof. You have to show that there is something afoot. And so in one of the cases, right, there was an issue of the claimant trying to prove her employment with our employer client by producing a photo of a hard hat.
Correct.
Right. And so the hard hat was a picture of the hard hat was filed to the board. And, when you were explaining this to me before we started recording, it was just incredible to listen to that. It was a black and white photo where you could not see the ID number on the helmet, right? Or the hard hat.
Correct.
And so what did you do that started or that laid the groundwork to make your fraud position or to make your disallowance position after that happened?
Well, during my cross-examination of the claimant, I said to the claimant, so you produced this photo of the hard hat to your attorney. It's now included in the board file. And, of course, she answered yes. And I said to her, do you still have that photo in your phone? And she said yes. And I said, Judge, I'm asking that, that the claimant produces the photo so that we can get a clear picture of this photo. She then sends the photo to her attorney, who then uploads the photo into the board file in real time.
Right.
So I already know what
2024, baby.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like immediate. And this is during trial. So before I even get to any further questioning, I raised fraud. And then that was the basis of my fraud because I was the attorney defending in the other claim. And by the way, these claimants had different legal counsel. So they weren't aware of what each other, in
their own attorneys did not realize the game that they were pulling.
Correct.
Yeah.
So when the hard hat was uploaded and I was able to see it clearly, and I saw that it was the exact same hard hat that the roommate produced in her file, I was able to raise the fraud just based on that. And I was able then to also tie the two cases together. I wanted the judge to have them travel so that I can prove the fraud. And that's how the case proceeded.
And the interesting thing that comes out, well, not just one, I mean, there are plenty of interesting things with that case, but the idea that, based on your experience defending these claims, you were able to realize that, you know what, I know my clients. A hard hat is issued to someone in safety training, and it's designated with that ID number as relative to a particular person, right? And so if it's registered for a particular person to use, then two people can't use the same hard hat. Is that what we were going with?
Yes. Yes. You're pulling all this out of me. You're taking all my secrets are now being revealed here, but that's absolutely correct. I mean, honestly, I remember the conversation with the client and describing the process of what they go through before someone can even start on the job site. I mean, New York has one of the strictest construction laws on the planet. So there's a lot of like checks and balances. And one of the things is orientation.
Right.
During that process, you're assigned a number. So if someone's on the job site and they present this hard hat, they can see the number and they can reference it against their books to see who this person is. So it's very easy to know whose hard hat that belongs to just by seeing the number. But of course, I mean, if you're not in the industry, if you're not, the people actually coming up with these, orientation plans, you wouldn't know that. So the claimant, she didn't think that it was a big deal. Like here, here's the hard hat. It shows that I work for this, this employer. But that was really the major part of this case that made it, take a turn.
Wow. And then, so the photo where, or I guess the case where it wasn't uploaded by the attorney in the middle of trial, then that had a resolution because I guess she might have gotten wind of what happened with her roommate or her friend's case. And then
I'm going to say fell off the face of the planet.
She left town. She gone just like a little feather in the wind, just yes. Gone.
Correct.
And because that happened, you got her claim disallowed.
Yes, in a very unique way. Should I discuss that as well? Or
well, we don't need to say who the judge was.
No, I wouldn't.
Right?
I wouldn't.
But I think what was very interesting was that, I mean, yes, like we can talk about that, but I'm so interested in probably the reason why it happened. So yes, go ahead. How did that claim get disallowed? Because she got lost in the wind.
Right. So what happened there, we kept pushing for the claimant to be cross-examined, the other claimant, but we had already raised fraud in both files. So once fraud was raised, that claimant never showed up again, which of course, our clients they get frustrated because they're like, they want a resolution. And typically what happens in the, in the comp board is that once the claimant doesn't show up again, they just mark it, failure to prosecute, and then they kind of let it sit. But what I did is we appeared for a hearing and I said to the judge, Judge, can you tell, claimant's counsel, give them a date specific for their client to come and actually, litigate this case. And the judge gave a date certain. That date passed. We went to the hearing on, we filed our request for a hearing after the date passed. So we get to the hearing and now my request is, Judge, you have to disallow this claim. The claimant is not pursuing this case. And surprisingly, the judge disallowed the claim and surprisingly, it was not appealed. So that's the law of the case.
So surprisingly, in so far as it wasn't a result that we would see, because like you said, right, once the claimants go away, it's just, okay, it's a failure to prosecute. They can even reopen it later. I think what was so important about this particular disallowance was, it's not just, hey, the claimant didn't show up for trial, they'll get another bite at the apple. It was very clear that the steps that we took based on the facts showed evidence of fraud very clearly, that, someone was making this accident up because there was, all these links that were then put together by you and your paralegal, Karen, who could just essentially make the story to the judge and say, look, like there's a reason why she's not showing up. It's not just, she's not showing up. There is a reason. And I think that helps the judge make that decision. Do you think is that?
No, absolutely. I mean, these cases, I mean, we're talking about them pretty quickly, but this was over almost a 2-year period.
Right.
Yeah, it was a very long period of time. So we were fighting the whole time and presenting more evidence and, making every hearing that I showed up to, I made the same argument. Judge, this is what's going on here. I'm raising fraud. I want to cross-examine the claimant. And again, the judges can see what's happening. Some choose to see what's happening. And I think it was the right result.
Yeah. And then, this third case that you were talking about, it's the claimant who actually had the hard hat.
Yes.
So how did his claim become disallowed?
Well, that was an interesting one as well. Now, when we discovered whose hard hat it was, of course, we then went into, our database to see if we also had that claim in office, and we did. So again, it's kind of like a fine line because I have information, but I can't just throw it out there. Like I have to lay a foundation. Like, what am I even talking about?
Right.
So that one, to be honest, was very difficult. I almost I was not sure that I would be successful in the disallowance of that case. But what I've learned when you get into the weeds of these cases and you start asking questions and presenting your evidence, you start seeing the holes.
Right.
So even this claimant, although he, had witnesses that he had fallen and that, all these things that he went to the emergency room, he had a lot of holes in his case. And I was able to kind of poke holes in that case. And I did during that trial just saying, by the way, judge, like this guy's hard hat showed up in 2 other files. And I think that's relevant. Not that the judge even considered that or what, but I thought it was a good nugget to leave in the room.
Well, it goes to his credibility, right?
Correct.
I mean, he is he assumes possession and control of that hard hat. And if other people are using it, right? Like, for instance, if I was a construction worker and someone stole my hard hat, like I would be reporting that, right? I'd be saying, hey, I can't work. I need this hard hat. But for that to mysteriously come into the hands of 2 separate people, that is a credibility issue for the judge to determine. And even though it's not, written in horn books to say, oh, like find where the link to the hard hat, right? It's the ingenuity, the creativity that leads to really the advocacy, right? That presents your argument. So just an incredible link for all these 3 claimants. And, it's a nice, home run trot around the bases when you see this article where you see like, oh my God, it's not just me, right? Like this is something that's just going around town, hopefully with some resolution in the future because really, and as this article goes into it, right, the costs are being passed to the average New Yorker, right? Like when insurance fraud occurs, right, policy premiums then dictate a lot of different reasons why, small businesses now have to pay increased insurance premiums because the cost of loss goes up, so on and so forth. And, that affects everybody.
Right.
So,
I mean, it's passed on in your rent payments,
oh, yeah.
People don't realize how it's a trickle down effect. I mean, it's really affecting New Yorkers. And that's why I think it's so important, that we're tackling these. I mean, we get really difficult cases, but I'll be honest, I enjoy fighting it. And I as they come through the door and I see one, I'm like, oh, this one's going to be difficult, but we're going to get to the bottom of it.
Right.
That's what I usually say.
We're going to get to the answer of it.
We're going to get to the bottom of it.
I think that it's just an example too that, in an industry where we don't often win, right? It doesn't mean you don't stop trying.
Correct.
It doesn't mean that, you don't uncover things, you don't attempt to see, wait, does this make sense? And, I think that a lot of times we get branded with this idea that, we're just, fighting injured workers, right? But in those 3 cases, we weren't even fighting injured workers. You were fighting people who fabricated accidents. And that should be made clear that those are the claimants that, should be fought.
Right.
Those are the ones who should be held to, a standard of actually, telling the truth, because otherwise how can justice really prevail?
I agree. And, it's unfortunate for the actual injured workers.
Oh yeah.
Right. And I think that's what the issue is here, right? Like
I would hate to have, not hate, but it's like, imagine you're a construction worker today, you have a legitimate accident. Now, potentially you could be seen because, all this thing is happening to the people around you. But yet it does hurt.
Right. It just makes it worse for the ones that actually need the help, that are actually injured. And I think I don't know if anyone knows this, but I'll disclose my husband is a construction worker.
Oh,
that's his job. I mean, he works in construction. So, people that be like, oh, you're the big bad carrier fighting, to not, pay people their money. I'm like, no, that's not actually what I do. Because there are actually people that are, injured at work, and they deserve, the protection of the comp system. But the ones that abuse it are really the ones that are, destroying it for other people.
Right. It's a sad state of affairs, but if it isn't really investigated, then it's going to continue to happen, right? If you don't stop the train, it's going to keep moving.
Yep. Stop the bleeding.
Right. So do you see, Meisha, I guess, any types of changes in response to what's happening? Like, do you think that, maybe the fabrications are going to get more specific? Do you think that maybe it's going to stop? Like, what is your take individually on the landscape now that all this is happening?
Well, the good thing about what's happened is with the new lawsuits that have been filed, the Subin and the tradesman case that have been filed, it's kind of bringing to light what we've been screaming from the rooftops all this time.
Right.
So I think that kind of puts people on notice, the doctors. It's putting, their attorneys, even the board, they're being put on notice that, hey, some of these cases are fabricated, and you really have to, take time to look at the facts before you even bring this case. I mean, I've been in cases where, the attorney shows up and has nothing to show that his employee worked for my insured. Why does that case even come before the board?
That's a good, it's a very, very weak prima facie showing to get the case to trial. And it's almost as if filing a claim is like 90% of the way there. Right. And it's now the 10% is really like, a little bit of luck and a lot of like real like nose to the grindstone work to really push those arguments, because the right things don't match up. It's that claimant gets a compensable claim and then tells the roommate. Right. Oh, man.
Yeah, but again, I think now that the light is shining bright on these construction cases, and I mean, if you read, I hope, after your listeners listen to this podcast, they'll go and read the complaint. I mean, it's unbelievable, some of the things that are being alleged, but it's not far-fetched. Like, I feel like, in some of the cases that I've seen, I had those thoughts, but they're very hard to prove.
That's a great point, right? Tradesman suit gets filed. No attorney in our office is being like, I'm shocked. No one's like, what?
Right.
What? I mean, everybody is thinking like, oh yeah, those same doctors, something was off about them, right? And in a lot of cases, we just couldn't prove certain things. And so when you now connect the dots, and you're right, like, the light gets a little brighter on those cases, then hopefully, if we're going to take some positives out of this, is that people are going to be really more careful about pursuing claims that really have no business in our industry, no business in our arena, right? If you want your payday, find it somewhere else, because our industry is going to start hopefully looking at these in a different light.
Yes, that's what I'm hoping. Although, I mean, it does keep us very busy, but I mean, yeah, some of these are, you kind of lose sleep because you see it, and you just hope that the judge will see it as well. And that's where it gets really difficult, because what I hate to do is report to my client that, I was unable to, get this claim disallowed or whatever else. But we just keep fighting. I mean, we just have to keep fighting. And I think eventually we're going to get to a point where, some of these cases just don't show up. Like you said, in our industry, it just goes away.
Well, unrivaled in your passion for your clients. Meisha, thank you for appearing on the show. So to everybody listening, I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure it's in your socials, your feeds. If you're listening and you don't know what we're talking about, quick Google search of some of the terms we've been saying, tradesman, subin, right? Like put in mafia and insurance. See what comes up with that. All of those things, you'll get to exactly where we're headed. So for Meisha Powell, my name is Christian Cisan, reminding you to defend from day one.